Can you hear us now?
There you go.
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
Oh, right, very good. Perfect, thank you.
all right. So just to recap a little bit of what I was saying, we're focusing today on what's really changed since the November draft that you all saw. And we feel like we've really fleshed it out significantly. We've tried to clarify the applicability of the various, of the structure of the plan with the guiding principles versus the visions and the implementation measures. We added targets to the vision areas to provide a little more direction and guidance to agencies on what it is that we're prioritizing under each of the visions. And then what I was just saying was that we heard a lot from agencies early on in the process that it would be great to have a clearinghouse of a resource that helps us understand all of the programs that agencies are running under these various priority areas, and to have that remain current. And so we've worked with agencies to create a more complete list of ongoing initiatives and resources. And we hope that this is something that we can continue to fill out, but also keep regularly updated. And we'll talk about that in a moment. We added one policy statement, and we very, very slightly revised the implementation measures, really no substantive change to those. And again, we began working on mapping, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. So how we clarified the structure of the plan. We're still putting guiding principles at the foundation of the plan. These are value statements, and they should permeate the work of all agencies in all areas. But the plan now really encourages agencies to fall back on these guiding principles when they're facing maybe competing priorities, or competing interests in vision areas, so that they can think about, how can the agency act with these values in mind, even if, we may be pitting one vision against the other. For the vision statements, again, these are the 5 priorities for the 2025 to 2030 period. Importantly, though, they are all equal priorities, and agencies need to consider all of them in their actions. And when OPM is reviewing an agency plan or action, OPM is going to be considering the impacts to each of these vision areas, or where there may be, opportunities to create synergies. The implementation sphere at the top is divided into 2 areas. On the right, we have the policy statements. We have 7 policy statements. Those are really intended to guide agency operations. They're very global statements. They may also help agencies when they're developing their plans and programs. The implementation measures, though, are intended to guide those specific actions that are required to be consistent with the C&D plan by statute. And again, all of the implementations measures have to be considered, and we can talk about the mechanics of how we're suggesting to do that in a moment. The guiding principles have not changed. They're still sustainable, equitable, vibrant, and resilient. And really all we've done is flesh these out a little bit more by adding a little more information on what does it mean for us to have this as a value? How is it going to look? So we've essentially added a second sentence to each, where we talk about under sustainable, this means protecting, preserving, and conserving our natural resources, efficiently and responsibly using our economic and human resources, and achieving and maintaining social well-being. And I won't go through all of them. You can read them at your leisure, but we just tried to flesh these out a little bit more to give agencies a better sense of how does this look in the real world. The visions, again, they have not changed. They continue to be a thriving economy, housing for current and future residents, stewardship of resources, healthy people and places, and connected and inclusive communities. And again, these are 5 equally prioritized visions. What we have done is under each vision within the plan, we've added a defining vision statement that summarizes the goal of the vision area. And then we've added these targets, which are really to, again, direct agencies in their plans, programs, and investments. They're not meant to be enforcement tools. They're really meant to just be guidance for agencies, but they suggest, some key actions that can be performed in pursuit of the vision. Finally, there's the brief discussions of current strengths and challenges, which have been fleshed out a little bit more within each vision area. And those really informed the development of the targets, as well as give a taste of current conditions and, why we are setting these targets, why this is an important vision area, and maybe some of the measurements that we can look at in the future to see how are we performing. So here is just an example of what a vision looks like now for a thriving economy. Again, we have a vision statement at the top. We have targets. So for thriving economy, targets are things like promoting infill development and redevelopment in areas with existing supportive infrastructure, and so on down the list. We have strengths, which are generally, facts about current conditions in the state. Current challenges are also facts about issues that we're facing as a state. And they really help to develop the targets that we use. The ongoing initiatives and resources, while they're divided by vision area, we decided to put this in a separate appendix, again, because we'd like to keep this as an up-to-date resource. So we've enlisted the help of sister agencies in just filling out, agency by agency, what are your activities, what are your programs under these 5 vision areas? And the idea is when we talk about implementation, we're talking about having an ad hoc implementation committee made up of agency staff, that we task that committee with annually going through this list. And is this still current? What else can we add? And I think it would be a good reminder to agencies to think about, how are we active in all 5 of these spheres, but also a great resource, not only for other state agencies, but for anyone active in land use and development to understand what programming is available through agencies. So this is still being filled out. We feel like we've gotten it pretty far, but I know we can continue to add to this. Again, the policy statements are those broad policies that are intended to guide agency operations and the development of plans and programs. We realized just out of oversight, we didn't really have something that touched on inclusivity. And so we added a policy statement at the end there, number 7, to seek out and facilitate meaningful engagement with diverse stakeholders. We felt like that was lacking and important to include in the policy section. Otherwise, those previous 6 policy statements are the same as in November. So now switching gears to the mapping, as we had come to you in November, we had suggested getting rid of the priority funding areas and maybe not doing any mapping because, again, we at OPM feel pretty strongly that you can't do mapping at a statewide scale to make site-specific decisions. You can't rely on that scale to make site-specific decisions. However, we appreciated the feedback and the comments and the desire to depict geospatially some priorities, and therefore we did some research and we started working with the GIS office on a new approach. But just for those of you who are familiar with the existing locational guide map, or those who aren't, we just want to make sure there's a base level of understanding of some of the challenges with the current mapping and why we are seeking a new approach. So the current mapping has relied on the census block as a basic unit of geography, both for the locational guide map and the priority funding area. And census blocks are based on a numeric count, and so they can range in size significantly from less densely populated areas to more densely populated areas. So in less densely populated areas, they're very large. In cities, they can be as small as a couple of blocks. And when you start to add in these development factors and conservation factors, and layering them into these base geographic units, you can encounter something as what's shown on the screen, where there's a large census block, and on the left you can see that there's a water service area that just cuts the corner of the census block. There are a couple of critical habitat areas which are conservation factors in this block. But because that water service area is there, that's a pro-development factor under the LGM and priority funding area scheme. And so the entirety of that census block is designated a priority funding area, and only those 2 small critical habitat areas are designated as balanced priority funding, which really just means that there are conservation factors to be mindful of. And so that can really skew an understanding of an area, because for all we know this could be an area that a town is really interested in conserving, that, it could be, though the critical habitat areas are small, the entirety of it could be forested or something to that effect. And so there's just a spatial mismatch between the factors and that census block geographic unit. So that's why we want to take a new approach, and because we have the GIS office that can help us with this, we can start to use new. Go ahead. I take questions now.
So thank you. So I have the same kind of question on a census block that's like this. So if I was a municipality and I needed a water or sewer infrastructure and you're at point A, you have to go through point B to get to point C. There is no other way to do that, but point B is a conservation area. So that a couple of times working with towns to increase their capacity for both water and sewer. I think that your new method of doing this might take into account something like that. Do you foresee that being taken into account?
So our new method, and I'll get into it in a second, is still not going with priority funding areas. I don't think that the map should be used as an enforcement tool. It should be used as a planning tool, and it should be used in conjunction with the plan itself, the text of the plan. And so if I may, I'll just go into what the new methodology is and talk about how we could see it working. So we did some research, and there's a report out of the Brookings Institution, and the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization has done some work around identifying activity centers of varying intensities. So activity centers are where we have employment, civic uses, transportation assets, cultural attractions, medical and educational institutions clustering at a local scale, at a hyperlocal scale, really. So these occur in our smallest communities as well as our largest communities. Obviously, the intensity is very different across that spectrum, as well as the size, the spatial size of them. But we think that this, if we can identify activity centers, again, of that varying intensity across the state, that this could help provide tools for agencies to look at current conditions relative to the action that they're seeking to implement, and relative to their own objectives, as well as better explore what components are there that made this an activity center in the first place. So, for example, if someone is looking for, okay, where would housing make sense that reduces, the need for transportation, that is a sustainable type of development that would contribute to economic development, you would look towards activity centers, but then you would also dig into the components that make it an activity center. So if we find that, oh, this is an activity center because it's got a high rate of employment, but not a lot of housing. Oh, well, housing probably makes sense here. If this is an activity center because it's got a lot of civic uses and a lot of housing, maybe employment makes more sense here to build out these more well-rounded activity centers. So again, by highlighting areas for these types of placemaking investments, and again, being mindful that it's going to be at different scales at different locations across the state, we're also highlighting those areas in between the activity centers as areas that may be more ripe for conservation, resource protection, or connectivity of some sort. Again, we think this would just be a tool, not an enforcement mechanism, and that it would have to be used alongside the text of the plan. We're still in data exploration and, exploring how to set up the model, but we are hopeful that this will be a helpful tool for agencies as well as municipalities, regions, the public in general, to kind of understand what are our current conditions. It would be very much a descriptive plan, not a prescriptive plan or map, but it would help to identify where we might focus some efforts. So we're working with publicly available data sets as of right now. And here's some sources of data that we've been working with the GIS office on identifying. The activity model components themselves include civic centers. So we're looking at, where are the post offices, the libraries, the town halls, where recreation centers, cultural centers, commercial centers, transit and traffic. We're also looking at residential densities, building densities in general, employment. And we think that we're going to be establishing an additive model, or better known as a suitability analysis, where we do some clustering analyses and then we add in other factors to determine our activity centers. These are some of the data sets that we're looking at. So you can see what might be feeding the model. And as we've started to play around with it, what we're finding is that because the data is coming in different formats, so we have some point data, we have some polygon type data, we're able to create or transform new data geographies. So we're not beholden to that census block anymore. And so, for example, the map on the left of the screen is a crash density map, just as a measure of activity. And it's drawn in these little hexagonal grids. The middle map is building density. And here we sort of separated more rural from urban contexts to see if it yielded anything different from just a straight out residential density map. And it was interesting, and what we found there. And so the darker colors are the higher densities, both in the green, the more rural areas, and the blue in the more urban areas. We're finding that, different scales may need to be applied across the state because our more urban contexts are very different from our more rural contexts. So we're going to be playing around with the scales we used at in different areas of the state. The map on the right is civic features and a clustering analysis around those. And you can see that's Northwestern Connecticut. We're picking up some activity areas in our, perhaps most rural area of the state. And so we think that this is a way to identify areas of focus around the state. So again, we're working through this process now to identify the model layers and the additive layers. We will have a draft for publication on March 1st, and we'd be happy to share interim products with this commission as we develop them throughout February, if you'd like.
And would you use this for the recognition of the reservation land?
So we talked to the GIS office about this as well. There isn't a good data set for the state recognized tribes. There is obviously for the federally recognized tribes. And so we have shied away from trying to map them. We have included mentions of the tribes throughout the vision statements now. But we could add to the map the federally recognized tribes, but there isn't a really good data source for the state recognized tribes.
So most all the 3 state recognized tribes had some dollars associated with them over the last couple of years in the budget. And my understanding is that part of them using that money did some analysis on borders of those reservations.
Okay.
I would check with them
to
see how detailed that was. But they were trying to make sure that they had enough land to do what the dollars were associated with.
Okay.
So
we will.
There would be 4 because there's the North Stonington Eastern Pequots, there's the Kent Schaghticoke, and the Golden Hill Paugussets have 1/4 acre in Trumbull, which is their original reservation, and El Grasso deeded them some land in Colchester. And they're all above 100 acres, except for that 1/4 acre in Trumbull. And the reason why I'm saying that to mention that is that working with Senator Maroney to open up the capacity for them to do recreational marijuana grow on their reservations. And so we're trying to get to a point where people understand that that's an allowable activity. Mostly what we want to do is to have them have the capacity to have economic development that can be supportive of their reservations. Much akin to what the federally recognized tribes have, the revenue received from gaming that is not portioned out to the state, but is kept by the tribes, has to be used for the tribes themselves, has
Right.
to be used for the tribal members for healthcare or housing or other things associated with the economic development of the two federally recognized tribal nations, and they're all state recognized. All 5 of them are
Right.
state recognized. So I just wanted to point that out, that we have a good data point on the reservations themselves, but I'd have to go back and ask Deep what they did.
We can reach out to Deep and
Okay.
see what they've done.
Thank you.
Okay. Did you have?
I'm just gonna say any other questions, because I know Representative Chafee's also available if he's, I don't know. Representative Chafee, are you able to ask questions right now?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say I do appreciate that methodology that you came up with. I know I've been putting some thinking into the maps and the issue with how problematic they are, basing them on the Census Bureau for the census data for the reasons you stated. I do like the methodology you came up with, and I'd like to see where we go with that. I do have some suggestions. Probably be best to just send them to you in email on data we could use to prioritize funding. But I thank you for the work you've put into that. I do like where we're going with that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. At this point, unfortunately, because we have no one else here, I don't think we have a lot of questions, but I just want to reiterate that the work is amazing. It's nice seeing the process, because I feel like we've really seen it grow and change, since we started. And I think, to all points, I think our goal is ultimately to have that thriving Connecticut, right?
Right.
And so as I read through it, it sort of gets me excited for what the future could be, because this is a wonderful way to guide. And I also really appreciate the fact that the agencies are going to have to, work together more, because I think that we do too many things in a silo in this state. I'm sure in others, but at least this way you'll have sort of these overarching principles that people will be thinking about and hopefully working towards as we move forward. So I thank you so much for all of this. Senator Austin, anything else?
I like where it's going. I think that broadening out all peoples from Connecticut has helpful as we do this. And I've been thinking a lot about the priority funding and having parsed out dollars to the town of Franklin, for example, and had to sort of go back and forth with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection on whether or not we could use those dollars to extend water and sewer on a main thoroughfare. And I fully agree that you want to keep the off roads as rural as possible, but the main thoroughfare really helped them out getting water and sewer along there, helped them grow their economic corridor in that area. But it was an argument about the priority funding, and the map said that area was not a priority funding area. So I think that looking at this, and I know where they need water in Franklin and Basra. I think that those are things that require in-depth thought and not just on haphazardly, but we also need to recognize that the state has goals relative to housing and transportation. And we do have to have that capacity.
Right. And so we would suggest that when faced with something like that, we'd be looking across those 5 vision areas, and are we meeting
Instead of a silo.
Targets in
Right.
each of them, or how do we maximize that we're meeting as many targets as we can?
And the reality is, it's not just the towns that the good senator mentioned, it's towns across the state that are going to need sewer and other things as well. I think especially the housing section, and as Senator Austin said about transportation. I mean, I don't want to say that looking backwards, we have not done a good job of this entirely, but there have been places where we certainly have not been as forward thinking as we could be. And with having the oldest, population, it seems, in the nation, we really, if we are going to meet some of the things that I know the governor and others want to have in terms of having a thriving state in Connecticut that moves forward, that attracts younger people, that attracts younger families, then this is it right here to have this plan in place and to have all of this thought about as we move forward. So I thank you so much. We're good.
I'm good.
Okay. All right.
All right.
That it's 10:35. We'll adjourn this meeting and look forward to hearing about the final draft. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you.